Who's ever gotten caught? Tell me if you've ever been in this kind of feedback loop, right? So you have a big problem. In my case, it was my house is in foreclosure. I'm in all this debt. My film didn't sell. I need to earn money, pay off the debt, save my house, rebuild my career. Well, I didn't have any money at the time as a resource, so my resource was time. So what do I do with my time? I start waking up earlier to start working sooner in the day, which means I'm not exercising in the morning anymore. And then, because I don't have time to go to the supermarket and cook a good meal because I'm on the run, I'm eating fast food, or I'm not eating at all. And then I need more time, so I'm working later at night. Now I'm working 18-hour days, I'm not eating well, I'm not exercising. What happens? You get exhausted. You get exhausted and your body stops feeling powerful because you're not treating yourself well. You're starting to get irritable because you're not sleeping, you're not eating well. So the people around you who are there to support you are trying their best, but it's not easy for them because instead of welcoming them in, you're pushing them away. So now I'm really in pain. Call it whatever you want. I feel guilty over the film not succeeding and a little bit of shame and all this financial stress. When we have life events happen, they create emotions in us. It's impossible to avoid that. But we also tend to take those emotions and create a physical manifestation of them that we feel is suited to the emotion. I particularly like this card because the artist drew the emotions as a physical presence. We're kind of taught growing up that anger is supposed to look like this, and fear is supposed to look like this, and sadness is supposed to look like this, and anxiety looks like something else, and my financial situation at the time was supposed to look like something else. I was doing more damage to my future because of how the physical manifestation of my emotions were creating my way of being in the world than what was actually going on. The debt was the debt, the house was the house, the business was the business. I was making it harder for myself to solve my problem because of how I was letting these emotions dictate how I showed up in the world. And I had this moment of insight. I was like, why? Why does sadness need to look like that? Why does anger need to look like that? Why does grief need to look like the social expectation of grief? Why do we have to physically be what we think our emotions are telling us to be? And that's really most of what I want to talk about today. How you can get into that moment. Events happen. Events create emotion in us. We can't avoid it. Emotion creates energy in us. We can't avoid it. Energy then manifests in us physically. We think that's autonomic. We think it just is the way it is, but it's not. I believe that every human being has the ability to get into that moment after the events happen, after the emotion hits, after the energy is created, and stop and say, no, I am still going to choose to show up in the world however I want to be more productive in my life. And that's what I did. And it was just as simple as like standing up straight and smiling. And that led to wanting to exercise in the morning. And that led to wanting to eat better. And that led to wanting to sleep better. And now I wasn't throwing all that time at my problem anymore, but I was throwing better energy and focus at it. I was drawing people in to help me instead of pushing people away through my attitude. My physical presence changed. I call it context. That physical presence is the context that you're carrying in a situation. It's a little bit different than maybe the definition you've heard. It's not what you say, as in let me give you some context around the situation. It's how you say it. Think of it as the sum total of your voice, tone, facial expressions, gestures. I gesture a lot when I speak. Body language. They create the physical impression of how you show up to the world. And to a very large extent, they define how others receive you, which is a really important distinction. Because most people, most leaders in companies, I believe in governments, while they spend a lot of time focusing on their content, what's my speech, rehearse it, get the words exactly right, pause at this comma, on their presentations, on their data, on their graphics, on their charts, on their graphs, your diction, your grammar, your prose, imagery if you use it when you speak. This is all content. Most people are usually unintentional about their context, unintentional about their body language and tone of voice, almost to the point where they're not even aware of the concept. So with that as kind of a broad introduction to context and content, what would you say that percentage weight of your words is, when you add it all together, your context, words, data, graphics, presentations, facial expressions, gesturing, body language, tone of voice, what percentage impact do your words carry when engaging with another person?
50%?
50%?
No, I'd say about 80%.
80%? So
What, John?
60%? So this study was done at UCLA by a guy named Albert Mehrabian, who determined that in engaging with another person, your words make a whopping 7% impact.
Oh, well, isn't that crazy?
7%. This is an empirical study that determined 38% of the engagement with another person is the tone of your voice, and a considerable 55% is your body language. Taken together, that means 93% of your impact on another person when communicating with them is non-linguistic. In other words, how you say what you have to say is some 14 times more impactful than your words themselves. And if you want a little example of what that looks like, just imagine showing up here in the morning. And you're walking down the hall, and everybody you pass, you say, good morning. And some people are going to say good morning. Some people are going to say, how are you? Some people are going to say, nice to see you. Some people are going to say, what's up? Whatever it is. You're going to get a variety of responses. But they're all going to say it differently. Someone's going to look you right in the eye and smile and a sing-songy voice say, good morning. And somebody else is going to be a little gruff that morning and go, hey, how are you? Somebody's going to have their head in their phone and not even look up, yo, what's up? Somebody else, maybe if they had a bad drive in and their argument with their spouse in the morning or something with their kids, is going to get surprised and bark, good morning. When you stop that colleague who barks at you every morning and you go, hey, you know, every morning when I say good morning, you just bark at me. What do they usually say? I did? I wasn't aware. That is the power of not choosing your context. And I bet at the end of the day, if you were to look back and assess what all of your colleagues' responses were in the morning, you would not remember with much precision who said good morning and who said how are you and who said what's up and who said how you doing. But you would remember very well who looked you in the eye and smiled and who barked and who didn't glance up from their phone. And if any of your colleagues are doing this habitually, if they're showing up every morning, they are creating how they show up in the world through their context and defining how you react to them. There have been studies shown that if somebody's walking down the hall at work looking for help with a report or to talk to a client, they're more likely to go for help to the person whose context is opening and engaging and builds relationship with them than the person whose context is shut down, don't bother me. Which means that person who is opening, engaging, is creating relationships and opportunities for themselves that the person who is throwing up this context is shutting themselves down to. We all knew that person in high school who got great grades but wasn't the student body leader. That person in college or after college whose reports were great, whose graphs were great, whose work was great, but didn't get the sale, didn't get the promotion, didn't make the top of the charts. And those people most often go home and just keep working on the content without ever considering, what am I bringing to the conversation physically that's closing off relationships and opportunities instead of creating them? And this multiplies beyond the office, by the way. This is your colleagues and your subordinates and your clients and your customers and even your families. A lot of people come to work putting on that work mask. I can get through the day, but it all builds up inside them, all the stress, all that, and then they drive home and then they walk into their families without thinking for a moment about who they're going to be when they walk into their kids and their spouses. And if you're able to assess others that easily, and we all do, we can all point at all of our colleagues and go, this person barks, this person keeps their arms crossed, this person smiles, we're all great at assessing other people, very bad at assessing ourselves. The chances are everyone else is assessing you too and forming opinions based on your context that they're probably not even conscious about, that is either creating or closing you off to relationships and opportunities. Who here, I love this question, has ever been misunderstood? Right? I mean, just everywhere, right? Spouses, kids, coworkers, bosses, employees, clients, the person in the grocery line. Hey, are you in line? Yes. Why are you barking at me? All I did was ask if you were in line. Happens all the time. The essence of being misunderstood. It's a disconnection between a person's intent, which is usually not intentional or even aware, but they believe that they're 100% clear on what they delivered. And the other person is 100% clear that they heard exactly the opposite. And then they start fighting. You said this. No, I didn't. What do you mean? You said that. I did not. You were standing right there. Weren't you listening? Who's ever had that argument with somebody? Weren't you listening? Yeah, they were listening. 7% to your words and 93% to your body language and facial expressions and gestures, of which, if you were unintentional and unaware, you were delivering an entirely different message to them than they received. This is where comedians get in trouble. They rehearse a joke in front of the mirror, and it's funny. And then they do that joke in front of their staff, and it's funny. And they do that joke on stage for 100 people, and it's funny, and 1,000 people, and it's funny, and you know where I'm going with this. Then they put it on Twitter, and it's not funny. Because everybody is misinterpreting their intent because they have no context to the joke. And now they're apologizing, well, that's not what I meant. Of course not, because they saw it in the mirror with facial expressions and gestures and tone, and when they tweeted it, they saw all of that. But the people who read it didn't. So here's an example of that. When I say this sentence in my head, I naturally stress the word didn't. I didn't say I crashed my boat. That's how I hear it in my head. But we're going to go around the table, and I'm going to start on this side, and I'd like you to read the next card, but I'd like you to intentionally stress the highlighted word.
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
So if you were listening to the sentence, I didn't say I crashed my boat, your response might be, well, what did you say? If you were listening to the sentence, I didn't say I crashed my boat, what's your response? Who said it? Same content, exactly the same content. Slightly different vocal inflection, different context, very different story. Not only that, but we're now picturing an unidentified third person in the story. In the first one, I didn't say I crashed my boat, it's just the speaker and the listener in that conversation. Now it's like, well, who's this other person that's suddenly come into this story? The next one.
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
Well, I heard it, so how did I get it? Did you text it? Did you write it? Was it telepathic? I'm now a little confused if I'm the listener to that sentence, and you can see a disagreement engaging.
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
So who would have thought when I first put that card up that this was a funny sentence? No one. Suddenly this sentence has humor and a completely different visualization. Now the speaker is in somebody else's boat with that third person probably on the shore freaking out watching him crash the boat. So an entirely different imagery in our head. And now let's flip the imagery, Jeff.
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
Now the speaker is on shore watching the guy on shore in his boat crashing it. Different story, same content. Totally different story.
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
What'd you do with it? Did you sell it? Did you dismantle it? Put it on eBay? What happened to the boat?
I didn't say I crashed my boat.
So what are you picturing now? I didn't say I crashed my boat. A car.
Yeah, let's scratch.
Suddenly you're picturing cars, motorcycles, airplanes. I don't know, you're picturing other vehicles that weren't even part of the story 7 readings ago. So imagine you sent that sentence to somebody on Twitter, text. And they write back, well, what the hell happened? And you're like, why are you yelling at me? I didn't say I crashed my boat. But they have an 85% chance of hearing it differently than you intended. And that's if you only stress one word. We all know you can stress multiple words in a sentence. I didn't say I crashed my boat. Okay, now we got a different person crashing it and a different vehicle. And then I can add emotion. I didn't say I crashed my boat. I didn't say I crashed my boat. I didn't say I crashed my boat. Multiply one inflection by 2 inflections by different emotions. We have hundreds of different contexts that can be delivered in this sentence. We start to see the potential for misinterpretation, miscommunication, if we are unaware of and unintentional of the power of context. If you're not being intentional about your context, you're leaving 93% of your effectiveness in communicating off the table, or worse, open to misinterpretation. And here's the trick about that. While we are all so bad at assessing our own context, mainly because we just don't practice it. We're all masters at assessing everybody else's. And if you're in a leadership position, people are looking to you for it. Your context precedes you about 30 feet in front of you, wherever you go. You guys have glass doors, which means people are reading your context before you even open the door and long before you open your mouth. Walk into a team meeting, a sales presentation, a client meeting, stand on stage to speak to 1,000 people. Everybody is assessing a leader from the moment they see them. People can assess your context as easily as you can read the context of the ocean. If you're out on a boat sailing into a lightning storm, what might you be feeling? Fear, apprehension, nervousness, distraction, jittery, turn the boat around, right? Regret. Can't swim. Somebody else might be feeling something else. But whatever you're feeling on this day, it's going to be different than on this day. The ocean has no words, but the ocean's context affects yours. It makes you feel something. When we assess leaders, especially people we call natural leaders, we all have them in our lives. We all have people we've worked for, or professors or parents, or that great uncle who was awesome. We all have somebody who we would call a natural leader in our lives. And there are many throughout history. I get Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and some people love Braveheart. They say William Wallace, and people will pick this president or that president. Most of the time, when you call somebody a natural leader, you're not basing that on how often their predictions of the future came true or how successful their businesses were. You're assessing how they make you feel. Churchill was wrong far more often than he was right. He was losing the war as late as June of 1944, right? 5 years into the war. But he never lost his context. Churchill's context, we'll fight them on the land, we'll fight them in the seas, we'll fight them on the sky, was we will never surrender. And the Britons didn't just follow him into battle, they followed him in that context. They united behind the context of we will never surrender. He led with that. And if you know the story or ever watched the movie Dunkirk, where the British Navy was trapped on the shores of Normandy, surrounded by the Nazi Panzer Division, who was about to blow them off the shore and destroy the entire British Navy in one afternoon, Churchill went on the radio and asked everyday Britons to get in their fishing boats and sail across the English Channel into battle to rescue the British Navy. And they did, thousands of them. You don't do that because somebody tells you to. You do that because they lead you to. And that's our goal. Our goal is to all develop a leadership presence that inspires others to want to join our vision. Not do it because we said so, do it because they're getting paid, do it because they have to, do it because they'll get fired. Those things will motivate, but not necessarily inspire someone to join a vision. That has to be done with context. And to become masterful at that, you have to get into the practice of assessing what your context is on a moment-by-moment basis, how things get into you and what energy they create and what that energy creates in you physically so you can start becoming intentional about it. So anywhere you go, we said birthday party, gallbladder surgery, whatever it is, are you going to walk in nervous and apprehensive or sour or distant or frightened or fearful or inhibited and lead others with that context to feel bad or distant or frightened or fearful? Or are you going to walk in energetic and positive and supportive and encouraging and vulnerable and happy and lead others with that, creating relationships and opportunities? The number one thing I always want everyone to go home with is being aware of and intentional about your context.